it's difficult to overstate the impact that the microprocessor has had on our modern world. For better or for worse, microprocessors are in everything. And while there are a lot of devices that have processors in them just because they can, like, should a light bulb really need firmware updates? There are so many things at the same time that we take for granted that just could not even exist without microprocessors. From pacemakers and other life-saving health and medical equipment, all the way to deep space telescopes that can practically see back to the beginning of time. The microprocessor completely changed everything. At the same time, it hasn't really existed for that long. As recently as the late 1960s and even still in the early 1970s, processors, not microprocessors, but processors were made of boards covered in dozens and dozens of discrete logic chips. And all those chips functioning together in concert could do simple processing. And it was only when all of that got put onto a single package that the world changed. There's plenty of room to debate which microprocessor was first, or even how we want to define first in this context. Certainly fans of the Central Air Data Computer or the Texas Instruments TMX 1795 can make strong cases for their respective processors, and they are both fine pieces of engineering. But I don't think that there's really any room to debate which processor had the most impact on the world. And that crown certainly goes to the Intel 4004. Hopefully, all things going well, this video is released on the 51st anniversary of the release of the Intel 4004 processor. While I couldn't find anything even resembling the beginning of a list of devices that used the 4004, I found some kind of anecdotal evidence that it was included in all variety of consumer electronics and industrial solutions. Lots of products that had some sort of user-facing elements. And that's just in addition to the Busicom calculator for which it was originally designed. The Wikipedia article about the 4004 mentions a prototype pinball machine made for Bally in, I want to say, 1974. That said, there are two myths about the 4004 that I'm not only not going to perpetuate, but I'm going to try to stomp them out a little bit. First, the 4004 is not the great grandparent of the modern PC architecture. The 4004 and the 8008 were separate architectures, separate contemporary architectures. Many of the same engineers worked on both of them, but they were entirely different products, different architectures made for completely different market segments. And I'll mention this again, they're different. Now, you can trace back modern PCs all the way back to the 8086, which can trace back to the 8080, which can go back to the 8008. The 4004 was followed by the 4040, and that was basically the end of that family tree. The second myth that I'm going to try to stomp out is the 4004 was not used in the Pioneer 10 spacecraft. The people who worked on that spacecraft have said publicly numerous times that they evaluated that chip, but in the end felt that it was too new of a technology to go into the spacecraft, which I find kind of ironic if you look back just a few years before at the mad scramble to invent all the technology to get men to the moon. And then, just a couple of years later, it's like, I don't know, this newfangled microprocessor thing seems too sketchy. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of funny. But the 4004 was used in a ton of user and consumer facing devices because it was a very easy design to integrate into things. It did not need a lot of glue logic to be able to connect it up to other things and make a complete system out of it. And there were some things about the architecture that made it really nice when dealing with data that needed to be presented to the user. Specifically a thing called binary coded decimal, or BCD. Oftentimes the 4004 is referred to as a BCD processor. And I think that a lot of people, even people my age, old fogies, who did a lot of assembly programming back in the day, don't have a lot of clarity on what BCD is or why it's useful. So I'm going to give a little background on that, and hopefully that will enlighten some of why the 4004 was actually a very interesting processor for its time and why it saw use in so many applications. Why it would have been so great for that pinball machine, why it got used in microwave ovens and all kinds of things. The key unifying element, things that had a human readable numeric display on it. So in traditional binary or hexadecimal, each bit represents some power of 2, and you can represent large numbers by collections of bits and bytes. So you might have a number like, say, E8, which is 232 in decimal. Now, if you have this stored in a computer and you want to display this, getting from here to there is straightforward, but not easy. Basically, what you do is for however large your number is, and you might have, if you're implementing a calculator with quite a bit of precision, you might have a fairly large number with a bunch of, so this is a single byte, you might have a 16 byte number potentially that you want to be able to represent and be able to display on the calculator screen. So what you do is you repeatedly divide this base 16 value by 10. The remainder is the digit that you display. And what you have left, you divide again to get the next digit and the next digit until this divides out to be 0 with just remainder. It's very straightforward. The problem is, on very old processors, even 8-bit processors that came out years after the 4004, they don't have a divide instruction. And even once processors started getting a divide instruction, I want to say that the div-s instruction, the signed divide instruction on the 68000 was hundreds of clock cycles. And that only gets you part of the division. That only gets you dividing, I want to say, a 32-bit number by a 16-bit number. If you want to do bigger divides, if you've got that, giant value that you're storing in the calculator and you want to display it on the 7-segment display, it's a lot of math, and math is hard.
Math class is tough.
Because you can't readily display this, there was an observation that a single half of a byte, also called a nibble, is 4 bits. And so if you restrict the values that you can store in each nibble to 0 through 9, you can just carve off this value, these 4 bits, and use a lookup table or something to just display that. So this, instead of storing this as E8, you would never have E8. That would never, this E is invalid and could never exist. What you would have is you would have 2 bytes that would be 2, 3, 2, and 0. So now the trick is, instead of having to do this division, things like addition are more complicated. And on these processors, all you had was addition and subtraction. Basically, right? There was no multiplication and division. They were all implemented in terms of addition and subtraction. Sometimes you had a shift by 1, which is basically add the value to itself. So what you end up having to do now is implement some other trickery so that, say you have a different value. Say you had, I don't know, 0, 0, 19, and I want to add 1 to this. Well, if I add 1 to this in hex, it would become, right, if this was a regular hex value, the answer here would be 1A, right? But this is invalid. So instead of at the 9, you have to have a more complicated addition circuit to be able to detect, aha, this is going to overflow into an invalid value. And then at that time, carry out into the next nibble. So you would get, 0, 0, 2, 0. And the 4004, I believe, only has BCD arithmetic instructions. And these kinds of arithmetic instructions, they persisted for a really long time. The 8086 has one of my favorite named instructions in all of computing. It has an instruction called ABCD. Add binary coded decimal. I love the only instruction that's named that I'm aware of that comes even close to being as silly is PowerPC has an instruction for flushing some things relative to I/O registers called EIEIO. I'm not making that up. That is real. So it has a regular, add instruction that does regular addition. And then it has the ABCD instruction that does this kind of carry. And then it also has different rules. You have some fixed register size, and on 8086, the fixed register size is 16 bits. And if your value would overflow out, would carry out, it sets a flag so that you can know if you're trying to do larger arithmetic that, aha, something carried out. I need to take that into consideration when calculating the next chunk. And so ABCD has different rules about how it calculates that carry out also. So this is where it's kind of clever that they took their requirements into consideration and said, well, if our fundamental unit is a digit to be displayed on a calculator, and we're going to do this in BCD, that's 4 bits. That's half a nibble. So they can structure everything around 4 bits. Now, there are some other kind of neat things in the processor. It has a fairly large register set. It has, I want to say, 16 registers. And one thing that's kind of neat about them is the odd and even pairs of registers. So each register is 4 bits, right? And you got 4 bits and then another 4 bits, 8 times. Like on 8086, you can pair up these registers. So on 8086, you have like the A high and the A low register, and each of those is a byte. Or you have the AX register that's both of them together as 16 bits. Well, on 4004, and assumedly on 4040, you have, I want to say it was R0 and R1, and you can't ever really refer to as this combination of R0, R1 as its own register, but you have different kinds of instructions. So like there's an inc instruction that increments a register, and then there's, I want to say it's in P, and there's several of these instructions that have where the last letter is changed to P, and that means paired. So inc takes some fully qualified register number and increments that 4-bit value, and in P takes an even register and increments the 8-bit set and treats the pair of registers as a single register. It's a similar kind of idea, but implemented in a pretty different way. So this is another piece of architectural evidence that, the 4004 did not evolve into the 8008, the 8080, 8086, any of that. They are separate architectural families that came from some of the same minds. So even on 8086, there were a lot of things where if you had values that you just wanted to, its only purpose was to be displayed to a user as decimal, you would store things as binary coded decimal. I remember I had worked on a very terrible CGA shooter game that was kind of, well, it was inspired by some other games, and for the score in that game, I did everything in BCD because the score was just getting added up and displayed, and there was nothing fancy getting done with it except getting displayed. And so it was a perfect fit for this. So when you think about something like that pinball machine where it's adding up the score and wants to do clever score multipliers or whatever, like, oh, when this light is lit, this other thing is 4 times the points or whatever. And like BCD is exactly what it would want to use when compute power is so limited and so expensive. And things like, displays on microwave ovens, I kept seeing that as listed as a place where these processors got used, and probably, other kinds of test equipment or whatever, where the main job was display some stuff to a user. We'll just store it in the format that it's going to be displayed in. This is kind of one of those optimization rules about, instead of trying to optimize your code that translates one thing to another, well, maybe just optimize out that translation altogether. This is the largest of the boards in this collection, and it also has kind of the most unusual edge connector. At first, I wasn't sure that this was part of the set for a couple of reasons, but I managed to convince myself. The main reason being that all of the boards have a stamp like this that have this DQ. I don't know if that's a letter O or the number 0. Have a stamp like this. Most of the other boards, I'll show on the later ones, have another round stamp on them that I believe is the maker's mark. But other than that, I'm not sure what this board does. I'm not sure what any of the boards do, but this one, most of all, it does also have. I don't know how easy they are to see. I'll pull in zoom a bit on this. So it does have the 4003. Those are IO shift register chips for, I believe, doing like parallel to serial IO translation. The 4004, because it has a very small package. I mean, the processor has, I want to say, the same size package as this. It might even be a couple pins smaller. We'll be able to compare them in a little bit. It's the size of the pipe that it has to communicate with the outside world is very narrow. So it needs some translator things, and some allowances have to be made to be able to talk to this thing. And when the 4004 chipset, it's kind of a collection of chips that came out all at the same time. This was one of them. And so that was used in a number of the things, including in the original calculator application was used. So often, if you see one of these chips, if you see anything that's a P4000 or a C4000 chip, a 4004 is probably somewhere nearby. I don't really know that these were used with much of anything else. I'm not sure. Oops. Zoom back out. I also thought it was interesting that this board has these mounting rivets. None of the other boards in the set have that. The back doesn't have anything descriptive on it. There are some numbers, and I Googled for all these numbers and was not able to find anything. I do like the very obviously hand laid out, hand drawn circuit board. For some reason, I always find that pretty. And then the other thing over here, I believe that this is some kind of a relay. I'm not 100% certain, and we'll see more of them on another board, so I'm not going to zoom in yet. These, I have no idea what these components are that have these like black helmets on. Okay, so the other kind of most bizarre board in the set, I'm going to flip this around, and now I should be able to kind of permanently zoom in. Is this board, and it's covered with these black helmet components. It also has a pair. Is it just the two? Yeah, I think just the two 4003 chips. Again, these are the IO chips. No idea what this edge connector is. Presumably this connector would go to some kind of a backplane. Not sure. Again, here's the CQO number. What I'm assuming is the maker's mark is this IOMEC stamp. It's on all of the boards except that first one that I showed. I was able to find that there was a company called IOMEC, and at the very least, they made some boards that were used in some very, very old HP disk drives. But other than that, I could not find anything about them. I mean, all this stuff is so old that it was pretty much vanishing even by the time people were starting to put lots of cool stuff on the internet. Lots of information about old things. This stuff had kind of vanished already. So no one had any of this stuff left to put pictures and say, oh, look at this cool thing that I have that's running, because these weren't running. Again, the back, there's nothing interesting on it at all to give any hints as to who made it or what its intended purpose was. The third board in the set, I'm going to have to zoom out. Yeah, I'll have to zoom out a little bit on this one because it's a little bit large. Has two edge connectors on it. Not sure. This edge connector is, no, it is bigger than that, as is this edge connector. So like none of the connectors are really the same size, except, whoops, I think that, no, and those don't even match. I have no idea. I really have no idea. The only reason that I thought that all of these went together is the chips, and I think this is the only board in the whole set that doesn't have any Intel 4000 series chips, but it does have this same DQO mark on it and the same IOMEC stamp. But other than that, it's different. And it has this weird, I'm wondering if this is some kind of a power connector up here, right? Because this is got a couple little transformers and stuff. So maybe this is the power board. I don't know. Yeah, no idea. And again, the backside, I mean, there are some numbers over here. Although that number, which I hadn't noticed before, might TPCDOO, and I think those are O's, not zeros. 614. That might be something. I don't know. I spent a long time with Google and looking through a whole bunch of websites and stuff, trying to find any information about these boards. And just, I could not really find anything. Now the last board in the set, of course I saved the best for last, come on now, is, of course, this board. I'm going to flip it around the other way because all the chips are oriented this way. So this is it. So you got the 4004 here, and it's one of the nice white ceramic ones. At first I was thinking that was a date code, but that would be the 86th week of 77, and I'm feeling like that's not that's not a thing. Which then has me suspicious that on this 4001, which is, so the 4001s are ROM chips, and there are quite a few of them, and the 4002s are RAM chips. I want to say each of these 4002 RAM chips is 640 bytes. This is not a lot of RAM. You've got like 1.25 kilobytes here. Lots of ROM. I was a little bit excited about this because if this is a date code here, I'm going to zoom way in on it. Whoops, I said in. This is a date code here for the 11th week of 1974. That's the week I was born. So that's kind of neat. But aside from that, again, I'm going to keep this zoomed in on this one. So there's the CQO number here. And I guess this one doesn't have, I don't see on it anywhere, that IOMEC stamp. But it is, I do feel confident that this is part of the same set with the others, and that is the same as that connector, I want to say. They're not quite exactly the same. Maybe it's yeah, they're different. They're just lined up differently on that. So this connector is, I want to say a 56 pin connector, and that had me thinking that maybe it was a, I will put on the screen what the name of the bus connector is. But after doing a little bit more searching about it, I don't think it is that bus connector. I think this is its own thing, and I am not sure what that thing is. I did think it was interesting that the crystals are not actually soldered on. There's soldered wires that go up to the legs of the crystals that are then wrapped around and soldered onto those legs. Yeah. Oh no, this does have the, I overlooked it before. This does have the IOMEC stamp on it. And again, nothing particularly interesting on the backside. It does also have that TPC C00588. So, I mean, I've Googled, I don't know that I've searched on these TPC numbers, but every other number on here I have searched for. And unfortunately, because last year was the 50th anniversary of the 4004, there is a lot of, I'm not going to say the word information. There's a lot of stuff on the internet about the 4004 that is all, yay, it's the 50th anniversary of the 4004. Let's all just sort of say the same stuff that everyone else is saying at the same time. And that just, if you search for anything and include the words Intel 4004 in it, your search is just going to get flooded with all these results that are not what you're looking for. So I found a lot of frustration with that. But my plan with this, I mean, initially when I found this board, now everyone hold on to your angry comments for a moment. When I initially was digging through a box and I found these boards, and the other boards I didn't really think anything of. And I found this one, and of course the ceramic dips caught my eye, and I looked at them and I said, oh, I know what that is. And I kind of wanted one of the 4004 to maybe do a project with, wire up a simple computer using it and do, I don't know what, just to like say that I did. So my initial idea was I was going to buy this board and I was going to desolder these parts. But I've decided not to do that, especially since I found the other boards in the set. Because this is I'm going to zoom way out, a very nice looking set. And so I think what I'm going to do is probably, I'm going to put these boards probably right about like this in a shadow box with a little card right here in the middle that kind of describes what this is and mentions, oh, hey, that's a 4004 over there. And it's kind of neat because, handful of reasons. So I think that's what I'm going to do with this. So I communicated with a guy, one of the resources that I found while I was trying to figure out what these were. I found a gentleman named Herb Johnson who has a website with a ton of old boards similar to this and the computers that used them, right? Because this was kind of the standard way of a lot of computers in the early mid 70s before the beginning of the PC revolution. It was, you had a bunch of boards that were stuck in a backplane and they all talked to each other and did stuff. And he had no idea what these were from. They were probably from some industrial controller or some kind of a thing, and there were lots of those that were largely anonymous. He had a bunch of ideas and suggestions about how to trace a bunch of the lines to these edge connectors and kind of figure out maybe how these boards talk to each other and try to figure out what it did from that. One, that sounds like a lot of work. And two, even if I did that, I don't, what would be the end goal? So I've kind of given up on that idea. The one thing that could be interesting, there are some projects to be able to read these ROM chips. And so maybe if the ROM chips could be dumped, there might be some ASCII or something in there to be able to figure out, what this was. The difficulty is I don't know. I mean, one, the ROM chips might be bad, right? Because these were just stored in a box in an attic for who knows how long. So they may have been, I've got the magic wrist strap on, but there's a good chance that these have been staticked to death after, 50 years, right? So the ROMs might not work, and I don't know that any of those projects are designed to work with ROMs in situ. And I feel like anything that you might do to try to connect these up, with, leads clipped onto the legs or something to try to, do like I had done, which actually conveniently it's right here, to do something like this to be able to connect, run wires from the ROMs to some kind of a device that can read them. I don't know if that would work with it in place. And I don't want to desolder these. So I'm kind of feeling like the mystery, unless one of my viewers has some amazing insight into WTF these are, I think it will likely remain a mystery forevermore. I'm not going to show the whole Shadowbox assembly, but I'm going to discuss one little bit. On the outside chance that these chips are still functional, I would very much like to keep them that way. And they are very, very sensitive to static discharge. And if they're displayed out in open in a thing that is not a very good static environment, some precautions need to be taken. Now, this is a method that has largely fallen out of favor in lieu of readily available anti-static bags. But in ye olden days, by which I mean before my time, what people used to do is they would store, with some caveats, would store circuit boards with aluminum foil wrapped around the back of them. And I remember years and years ago when I was in college, I was a computer science student, but I took some electrical engineering classes just because I was curious about such things. And the professor that I had for all the EE classes that I took was Dr. Doug Hall. And he brought out some boards one time that were wrapped in foil and was talking about them. And after class, I asked him, I'm like, okay, I've seen that before. The whole thing seems sketchy. But I'm going to trust you. But I want to know. It's kind of the whole trust but verify thing. Like there are times when I'm willing to take on a little bit of faith that something is true, but it's going to drive me nuts if I don't know why. And what he told me was what causes static damage to chips is the difference in electric potential between the pins. By covering the back with foil, and you do not want to do this on any board that has capacitors that might still have charge. Now these ceramic caps are not going to have any charge, or a board that has a battery. So those are the caveats. But otherwise, what you're doing is effectively you're shorting out all of the pins together. So that even if there is a static discharge, someone rubs their feet on the carpet and pokes one of these chips, that electric potential is going to be evenly applied or more evenly applied across the pins, and that's going to be less likely to cause damage, even though there has been a static discharge. It's definitely one of those it's better than nothing kind of solutions. It's not ideal, but I think for something that's on display, it's the best I'm going to get, because I can put this foil on and kind of wrap it around the sides a little bit so that it hangs on, and have it. I can't put these in anti-static bags and have them out on display. That would defeat the purpose, but I can do this, and it's better than nothing. So that is my understanding of why this works I kind of went to reconfirm that a little bit by looking up on the internet, and there was lots of people saying, no, I think that's stupid. You shouldn't do that. And there were a couple of good reasons about why you shouldn't do that, especially on modern boards. One of them being it's really easy for this foil to rip. And if you got a little piece of that foil ripped off and stuck between the pins of, like imagine you had this on the back of a Socket 370 motherboard and you ripped a little piece and got, something on the back of the CPU shorted out. The odds are very high you wouldn't even notice that little ripped piece of foil stuck in there. And then when you turn, so you had protected it from static, but you had then set it up to be destroyed through, a different kind of electrical failure. All right, I'll take that. That's fair, and that's why knowing. Not just taking something on blind faith, but knowing why it works, and then also knowing kind of when to not do it, right? Knowing when to apply a certain thing and when to ignore it. Sort of the you have to know the rules to break the rules, kind of a thing. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna move this off to the side. I'm going to wrap the rest of these boards like this. It is going to be a little bit challenging. I have a tiny temptation to use a little bit of of Scotch tape to affix this foil to the back. But if there is a more staticky substance in an American household than clear tape, I don't know what that substance is. So I'm going to resist that urge and just kind of wrap it, and there it is going to be up against a backing on this, so I'm not terribly worried about it. I'm going to go put that together. I don't know if this is where this is going to live permanently, but I think for right now it's a pretty good place for it. I'm pleased with the way that the cabinet turned out. I'm still intending to do a little card of some sort to put in this middle area, kind of making some attempt at describing what this is so that when I have house guests come over, they'll be able to see it and not just think it's some weird old crap hanging on my wall. I mean, it is some weird old crap hanging on my wall, but at least it'll have a backstory. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, click the subscribe button. And until next time, try to remember the good stuff.